Good morning and welcome to our adult Bible class. This series is called Race and Grace, the Church, Racism, and Taking Steps Forward. This interview is with my friend, Luis Cedeño, who is here in Austin, and he has such an important story to share with us today. So tune in and enjoy. Okay, tell us a little bit about who you are.
All right. So my name is Luis Cedeño. I am from Houston, Texas. My mom was born and raised in Mexico, dad from Venezuela. So they came to the United States when they were around 20-ish or so.
Okay.
So I'm first generation born here. So yeah, I grew up in a pretty interesting setting, I guess you could say, because Houston is an extremely diverse place, but the diversity that I grew up in was still pretty segregated. My church was bilingual, and so we had, the English speaking and Spanish speaking. We'd meet together, and I was very much raised by the Spanish speaking congregation of my church, and then my school, or the schools that I grew up at, were mostly white schools.
Okay.
That's kind of like the racial diversity backdrop of what I grew up in,
So one of the things that we'll be talking about in this class is the fact that racism affects different areas of people's lives. It's not just limited to one aspect of someone's life or one individual story. So can you share with our group a little bit about how racism has just affected your time in schooling, whether that's, elementary to high school or then after high school?
Yeah. So I definitely picked up at an early age that it was bad to be Mexican. And so there it wasn't so much like targeted racism at me.
Okay.
But just the way that people spoke about Mexicans and Hispanics in general, like at school and just in general, it definitely taught me that it was bad to be Mexican.
Okay.
And so that was something that was ingrained into my head at a pretty young age. And then this experience isn't so much, it didn't happen at school, but it kind of was part of the formative year experience. And I think this was kind of like an interesting straw that broke the camel's back in a way. But I remember I was visiting family in Mexico, and I was probably in I think I was in 6th or 7th grade at this point, and so my family had gone to spend some time in Mexico, and we were driving back across the border to get back to the United States, and there was this really interesting experience that happened where the border patrol stopped us, and they were kind of just looking at our paper, just standard border stuff. But then they kind of started asking me all of these questions, and I had no clue what was going on. I was very confused, but it was definitely what is your name? Where were you born? What's the name of the hospital you were born in? What's your favorite class in school? What's the name of your favorite teacher? Stuff like that. So I was kind of kind of tense about it, kind of confused as I was answering the questions and all that, but I was pretty flustered about it. And I remember when he asked what my favorite class was, I said my Spanish class is my favorite class, because it was and who's your favorite teacher? I said, oh, Senor Medina. And so I'm just answering the questions and I'm saying that, and then my grandpa sitting in the front seat, and he just turns around and is glaring, looked so upset, and almost he thinks that I'm trying to be funny or messing with the guy, because it's kind of clear at this point what's going on. Because I definitely looked the most Hispanic in my family. My siblings kind of are lighter complected, and my parents as well. But I didn't pick up on any of that, and so when everything was good and we left, my parents were they were what are you doing? So, and I was crying. I was what? What did I do? I was just answering the questions. Why was he asking me these questions? And wasn't asking anyone else? All this stuff. And they said, it's because you look Mexican. And I was 10 or 11 years old. And so it kind of clicked in my head at that point, I don't look like I belong here.
Mm.
And so that kind of paired with the other experiences at school and just hearing the negativity towards Mexicans and all that, like it led me to be very, very ashamed and in denial, I guess, about being Mexican. So that was kind of the moment where after that happened, I kind of adopted this attitude of I need to like prove that I belong here.
Yeah.
Because me being born here and being an American citizen, for my like 10-year-old brain, based on like what kids at school are saying, like what's happening at the border, like that's not enough. Like I need to prove and
Go above and beyond.
Exactly. And so from there, again, it became a subconscious thing where I became very, very ashamed to be Mexican. I disassociated myself from everything like Mexican about myself. I stopped telling people I was Mexican. I stopped speaking Spanish in public. Like if people asked what I was, where I was from, I would say like I'm American or like Venezuelan, like because no one hates Venezuelans, they hate Mexicans, so I'll just adopt it. I'm Venezuelan now, you know.
Oh, okay.
And so, if you talk to people who I went to like college and high school with and ask them like what's Luis's ethnicity, they'll tell you like he's Venezuelan. And they might even tell you the hoops that I've jumped through to explain how like, well, yeah, I know my mom was born and raised in Mexico, but like if you actually look a little bit further back, like where her parents are from and where my dad, like I'm not Mexican, you know, like I'm not Mexican.
Okay.
And so for school that was a big part, and then for college and also in high school, a lot of the again stuff in my ear about like affirmative action and this that like. My parents used to get upset at me because when I was applying for colleges, I would not put that I was Hispanic because I kind of wanted to like show the world that like I can get into college without this, and you know them kind of explaining like you need to stop caring so much what people think about you, and like you are Hispanic and you should put that down. Like no, you don't get into school because you're Hispanic, and I'm like yeah you do, like that's what everyone says, like, and so. I think in the academic setting, that's how it affected me the most, was that, and it's weird because again, a lot of times I haven't often felt like the direct target of like someone pointing at me and saying, you're Mexican and I hate you because you're Mexican. It's more kind of the societal view of Mexicans and minorities, especially in academic settings, and especially when it kind of hits you at a super young age.
Yeah.
And gets kind of ingrained in your identity, it really sticks with you, I guess you could say. And so kind of in the academic setting is kind of where I think I've felt it the most. And with just, I've never been made to feel like my academic achievements can be attributed to my intelligence. And just like my academic background, like I went to Texas A&M, and then I went to graduate school, USC, got my master's in health administration, starting nursing school here in a couple of weeks as well. But just like, I always thought that I was getting into stuff, getting scholarships because of affirmative action, this, that. And it actually wasn't until like 3 years after I graduated from A&M that I learned that A&M doesn't do affirmative action. Yet I thought that I was at A&M because of affirmative action, because that's what like people are saying. And I'm like, wait, they don't even do affirmative action. Like, how is that even possible? And so, so I think with that, I know that's kind of a specific thing I'm drilling on, but I think it's a dangerous attitude and or like rhetoric for people to have when. To me, I think if everybody considers all of the factors and then decides, yeah, it's because you're Hispanic, that's one thing. But for me, it was always like, it's not in the realm of possibility that it's because of anything besides Hispanic. And again, it wasn't people like pointing at me and like saying it, but just the comments, the jokes, the this, that, where it's like no one ever asked, what's your GPA, by the way? Like, what kind of organizations are you a leader in? Like, maybe it's the fact that maybe you speak 2 languages and not one. Maybe somebody that contributes to, you know, things like that. And so, it really wasn't until like the last year where kind of started rejecting some of that, I guess you could say, because like it was always only my parents. My parents were the ones who were telling me, you're very smart, you know. But I'm like, doesn't matter if you tell me this because you have to. And so in the school setting, I would say that's kind of the way, kind of the whole from like 3rd grade, 6th grade experience, high school, college application process, throughout college. That's kind of like the way.
So that seems like from a pretty early age, there's a kind of message in the water, in the air, in the atmosphere. I need to set aside this identity in order to succeed.
Absolutely.
And even if I do succeed, I kind of have to be worried that my success isn't due to intelligence, hard work, or my abilities, the things I've accomplished. Even when I do succeed, it's probably because of I'm being like given a favor.
Right.
Have you experienced that in the workplace?
So the workplace, I would actually say not nearly as much. Like, and again, I don't want to give off the impression that like again I was felt like this target of racism because at A&M, like I felt very, very accepted by my peers and like my closest friends or my friends from A&M, and so yeah, I'd definitely say it was kind of just the weird message in the water type thing. In the workplace, and I think probably something that contributes to it is that so I work at People's Community Clinic, which is a clinic that serves underinsured, underserved population of Central Texas, and so most of our patients are Hispanic, and most of our staff is Hispanic, and so that was kind of an interesting shift where I went from at A&M, most of my world in high school, most of my world was like white, and I was kind of the Hispanic, and then in the workplace, it kind of shifted back to everyone around me in the community is Hispanic, and so I definitely, again, it like the workplace is something where it's almost been the reverse effect, where I'm reminded this is the Hispanic spirit and attitude. This is what Mexicans are actually like. I think something that I realized is that I allowed like white people to tell me what it means to be Mexican and Hispanic for my whole life, and I just bought into that and was like, oh well, that's not me, so like I'm not that. I'm with y'all. You know, like don't associate me with that, which is it's a really tough thing to come to grips with and like reflect on, because I was raised by Mexicans, Latin Americans, and they're the greatest people in the world. And I have examples throughout my life of what it means to be Mexican and Hispanic. And so like if anyone's the expert on that, it's me. It's not like white people at my conservative schools. You know what I mean? And so the workplace that I'm in right now has been a really awesome reminder of like, yeah, this is why do people think this way about about Mexicans, like about Hispanics? Like it's just spend a little bit of time and learn, you know. And so yeah, I think the workplace is a place that's been like a positive in that regard.
This would be kind of the last area, because we're trying to talk about different aspects of life that are affected by racism. How do you feel like your experience in church has been?
Yeah, so thankfully I have the church experience has been interesting, because I've never been to a church where I didn't feel welcomed and loved and cared for, you know. And I've had the blessing of growing up a bilingual church where it's like half white people, half Hispanic people, and it's a small church, and it was again like being raised by a village, and there's diversity. They meet together, they eat together, and so that the church I grew up in was like a beautiful picture of diversity and like what I feel like heaven is gonna look like, with, you know, people from all over the world. And you know, and then like the churches in college were predominantly white churches, and again the interesting thing about church is that as a minority, something that I've accepted, and it's not something I've ever been bitter about at all. Like I've always just accepted it as part of the experience, not in a negative way. Is that there's being one of the only minorities in a circle of people in like a group setting, a big church with 500 people, and there's like 3 Hispanics, or in a college where you're one of very few, high school, things like that. Like something that I think comes with the territory is there's experiences, like 10 to 20% of my experience I will just simply have to do alone. And there's always been this like 15 to 20% part of my identity and who I am that it like doesn't make sense much for it to be shared with other people, because like I'm not just gonna go start speaking Spanish in front of all my white friends who don't understand Spanish, or like cultural things. Like it almost feels like this is the culture, and I'm the guest, and I need to like, and it's my culture too. Like I'm American, and so I've always been like okay with that. And so I've never had any ill will at church. I've always felt like accepted as an individual and like loved and things like that. But something that I have noticed is recently, especially with like people like you, and I've like a couple other church buddies too, who they've recently broken through that 20% that I always was like, this is just my territory, and that's fine. Like it is what it is. But realizing what it's like for someone to break through and like address this part of me that I always like suppress and keep to myself, like that border story I told, I've like never told that story out loud. Wow. And so it's almost like this feeling of it's possible. And like it's not easy, and it isn't something that I expected from people. But it's possible, and like you did that, and I've had other friends, like my friend Drew, like he works with Mexicans, and he's one of the people who kind of like started this journey of acceptance of who I am for me, because he like makes me feel proud to be Mexican. He's like, these are the greatest dudes ever. Like they're so hardworking and dedicated and things like that. And then, if I may, there's just this one other story that was a big part of this too. So when I was moving into the current house that I'm in, me and my roommates were there like touring it with the landlord, and the landlord made a comment about like property that he owns in Mexico, like in I think it was like Puerto Vallarta or something like that, and he said to us like, yeah, but I don't rent to Mexicans. And he said, yeah, because they just like bring all of their family and people in, and it's like a big thing. And it really kind of like took me back a little bit, because it led me to believe that, one, you either don't like acknowledge or see me as like Mexican, or you do and you don't care. And my theory is that he didn't see me as such because I'm like well spoken and can afford this, or whatever. And again, that might be speculation, but that's just kind of what the energy was. And so I did what I normally do in those situations, because I was not going to like call him out, because I knew it would not be in my best interest to do that. And like, again, it was just a comment from a guy, I shouldn't care, like whatever. And so I went upstairs just because I needed to kind of like get out of that setting. It was just really upsetting, because my mom had a similar experience when she got her first place in college, where her roommate made a like super racist comment. So it was like this full circle thing, like here we are 30 years later, and now like this guy is saying something about Mexicans. And so it was a lot to take in for me at that moment, when normally that stuff, it just bounces off me, because I'm like, whatever, like you're dumb, like it doesn't matter. And so I was up there, and it was one of the things where it's a 20% rule, I gotta face this alone, this is my thing, I got this, like I can do this. So I went upstairs, and I did my typical reaction, which is, he didn't mean it, he's not racist, like he just said something dumb, it wasn't racist, like I was like trying, I just convinced myself, try to. And then my roommate came upstairs, and I don't know if he did it to check out the upstairs room or if he noticed. I don't know what the reason was, but he came to the room I was in, and he was like, "Hey man, that was like super racist what he said down there. Like I'm sorry." And I was like, "Right?" I was like, "I'm not crazy. That was racist, right? Like that was really okay." Like, and it was one of those things. And again, he's a church friend from A&M and Bible study, Sonny. And so it was again this moment where my expectation for that type of thing has always been like, this is my thing that I just have to address sometimes, and it's fine. But then it was that realization. That was an example of Sonny breaking through that 20% thing. And I'm sure to him it like wasn't a big deal, but for me it was like, thank you. Like I like feel crazy sometimes and again it like what the guy said, it wasn't like a racist thing towards me, but it was just this really saddening moment of like, this is like what he's saying is how so many people view Mexicans in this country. And it like the fact that when he thinks about this experience he had with Mexicans, he applies it to every Mexican, and he says this is a Mexican trait.
Mm-hmm.
Where for me, being a Mexican and like what it means to be Hispanic is so much more than that, and so much more like beautiful and
mm-hmm.
like loving and caring and nurturing. And so again, it was just almost like not so much that I felt personally attacked, like, oh man, he's not gonna rent it to me because I'm Mexican, but just like, it just breaks my heart that he and so many people, and it's just a reminder, like here I am 20 years after these experiences I had as a child, and it's serving as a reminder, oh yeah, this is why I hated being Mexican, and this is why I had this like identity crisis as a child where I like suppressed my race for
mm-hmm.
for 20 years, and so for Sonny to come up and to kind of like acknowledge that, it just helped me feel a lot.
Yeah.
Just like I wasn't crazy, and like I wasn't alone in that. And so I do attribute that to like a church thing, because when I think about church, I think about individual
mm-hmm.
church brothers and sisters and how they can break through these like racial barriers that a lot of people of color are kind of carrying with them. Because a lot of times we're fine, like I was fine with that not being addressed, I thought, but it wasn't until like you went out of your way to like get me to share something again that in my 27 years of life I've never talked about, and like you bringing this opportunity up and me reflecting on the questions, it helped me just peel back all these layers of like
mm-hmm.
suppression that I've had in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, so like this experience is why I get so mad when someone said something, and why people probably think that I'm like the crazy guy who like needs to calm down. Like, because it's not just this comment, like with the landlord thing, like that was just one stupid sentence that like should not bother me. But then like with this exercise, I'm realizing like, oh, there's like 20 years of suppressed like
mm-hmm.
emotion
mm-hmm.
that's like under that comment, that when he says that, all of it wants to like scream out. And I'm like, why is this making me so mad, And so when my Christian brothers and sisters are able to kind of break through that wall and help me understand myself and understand that it's like this level of Christianity and oneness with Christ that I haven't experienced before. And I can only hope to offer that to my brothers and sisters, because I don't think that it's like only race. I think everybody has stuff like that, like suppressed things from their past, things that they carry with them. And if we really like push through that wall, like it like you doing that for me, Sonny doing that for me, it makes me want to be more aware of like, what are my brothers and sisters carrying with them
mm-hmm.
that they might not even realize they're carrying with them, and how can I like push through and do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I've been like reflecting on for the whole church aspect of it.
Yeah.
So
kind of shifting to a different kind of mode here at the end. You've been able to share some of your experiences kind of in different aspects of your life, but this video is going to be seen by fellow Christians
Mm-hmm.
who want to know more about racism in
Mm-hmm.
our country and in our churches. What would you say? What would you want white Christians in particular to know? What would you say to that group?
I jotted a couple things down actually. Okay, so one, don't let politicians dictate what a Mexican or Hispanic person is. Because I have problems with the way that conservative politicians and liberal politicians talk about Hispanics, because I feel like on the one side it's almost like default mode is negative and you have to crawl out of that hole, and like it is like default is you're a criminal or you're a bad person or you're lazy or this that, and then default mode for the other side feels like you're helpless and you need me, the like white liberal, to come pull you out of your misery. And I don't think either of those things come close at all to defining what the Latin experience is. And so I think you need to hear it from Hispanics, and you need to learn and like spend one day with a Mexican or Hispanic and let that dictate what it means to you. And I think a good way to do that, like very applicable, there's a show on Hulu called Taste the Nation. Episode 1 does exactly that. And so I would say watch episode 1 of Taste the Nation on Hulu, because it allows Mexicans to speak for themselves, and which it isn't something that I feel like happens very much. And it also is because, like, generally speaking, immigrants are not concerned with all this. Like, they are here to work and to provide for their families and to provide a better life for their kids. They're like, no one's gonna escape these like street war torn situations in countries to like complain about what is being said or like comments, things like that. And so I think that's an important thing to know. I think it's also important to know that the only immigrants who come to the United States, legally or illegally, are the ones who believe in the American dream. They're the ones who see the United States as a place for them to prosper and to provide a better life. Because I think sometimes there's this narrative that like immigrants come to destroy the country and to like wreak havoc upon our country, and that is nonsense. And so think about the only people who come here are the people who believe in the American dream. I think that's important to know too. Everything I've said today is my experience. Do not let my experience be applied to every Hispanic or Mexican, because I think I come from a lot of economic privilege. I think I'm way more privileged than a lot of Hispanic people. I think in a lot of ways I'm more privileged than a lot of white people. My parents set me up for success very, very well. Like, I would have had to make some huge mistakes to not be successful in this country. And so on the spectrum of like racism, I think I very much am on the light end of it. And so again, like, don't apply my experience to others. It's important to learn. And yeah, I think the last thing is reflect on how you're using your status as a white person, as a privileged person. Think about like what type of situation you were born into. Because my favorite thing about Jesus and about Christianity in general is from Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 through 8, where it talks about how Jesus did not see equality with God as something to be grasped. But taking the form of man, he came to earth and like to understand it. So I think it's really interesting that Jesus used his status as God to lower himself and understand us as sinners and humans. He didn't use his status as God to elevate himself, to like continue bolstering his own status as God. And I mean, this advice, I guess you could say, like applies to me too, because again, as a economically privileged Hispanic person, how am I using that to serve others who are less fortunate and in rougher situations than I? Or am I using that to just like create a bigger name for myself and to like elevate myself and just like, ooh, sorry, see ya. Like, imagine if Jesus did that. Like, it'd be awful. And then, yeah, I think just trying to break through that wall. There's the example, too, of the way Jesus responded to Mary and Martha when Lazarus died. I think what's interesting about that is that they say the exact same words. If you were here, my brother would be alive, like word for word, exactly the same. But Jesus knew them deeply enough and well enough to know that Martha needed kind of a monologue about the resurrection and this, that. And Mary just needed Jesus to weep with her. And so I think that kind of touches on the idea of, I think a lot of people are raised to be like colorblind, and I understand the intention of that, and I do think that you should treat everybody as a child of God. But I think sometimes what happens when we ignore people's race, what we do is we assume that their worldview and experience is the same as ours. And so if somebody has been taught to ignore race and treat everybody the same, then something that someone says that makes me super, super upset, but doesn't make you super, super upset, you might look at me and be like, why are you upset about that? You're being dramatic, like that's annoying. Whereas I think the way to love everybody as a child of God is to like see every part of them and see them as a holistic person, and to realize that if somebody has a different skin color than you, they have a different world experience from you. And so I think that kind of nuance to it, the intention is great, but I think a way to accomplish that is to like consider that part of who they are. And I think, again, that goes for stuff beyond race. You know, I think everybody could do that with, regardless of that.
So what would you say to fellow people of color?
I would say similar, like, I think what I said earlier applies to both. For the people of color who are more outspoken and vocal than I typically am, I would say thank you, because I am like, doing this is like terrifying for me. Like, I have strategically and purposely avoided talking about all of this because it has always been in my best interest to not, you know. And it's worked well for me, besides the fact that I have all this like suppressed stuff that like besides that whole thing, it's I know it has like kept the people around me kind of like comfortable, and I haven't ruffled a lot of feathers, and you know, I think I've been used as an example a lot of like, see, like if you could just do this, like I think people oftentimes see when I'm like the only Hispanic representative that they have, they assume that I'm different than the rest, rather than like maybe the rest are like me, and like the rest raised me, and like that's why I am this way. And so I do commend the people who are not as scared as I am to talk about this stuff, because it's really hard for me to talk about, and I selfishly am always thinking about how it might like hurt me and my status with the people around me to talk about it, and so I kind of just don't. And so again, I think you giving me this opportunity is good for me because I need to, and I think it's unfair for me to assume that all the white people around me are like, you know, against me or whatever, because I don't think that. My best friends are white, and you know, my best friends' families have taken me into their home and like allowed me to stay with them and have blessed me in ways that I could never imagine. You know, and so I think it's I don't know, it's like this weird balance where I'm trying to, I don't know, I guess just tease out the negative experiences I have and not do the same thing, like not attribute this to the whole. And so yeah, I would say we can all work on that, and yeah, I think just keeping things rooted in Christ and just trying to see each other how he sees us, and in the same way with Mary and Martha, like Jesus goes out of his way to know me at the deepest level of my core, and to know you at the deepest level of your core, and he loves us the same amount, but differently, like you know. And so I think just trying to emulate that as well as we can, and for everybody to just not get defensive or take things personally, and just listen better and express ourselves better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This is going to be so beneficial, enlightening, helpful to all the people watching. And I know that it's part of a process for you of teasing out maybe some things from the past that have been difficult. And so we're kind of seeing you process some of these things live.
Yeah,
right.
That's exactly
so
what's happening.
I appreciate the the risk involved in that.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think what's so important is to hear your story and to learn from it. So thanks, dude.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.